All right. Good morning, React Europe. Yeah. I'm so excited to be here with you all today. My name is Vicenti, and I come from a web development background, but I've spent 3 years or so at Facebook working on React Native apps and working on React Native Core itself. And I've spent a lot of time working on navigation as well in that environment. I've recently been working on React Navigation with Expo, and it's been extremely exciting to sort of breathe new life into this project. We managed to ship V2 just a few weeks ago. It has some minor breaking changes, and people are starting to move over to it without too much friction. So I'm very excited about this. And today I'm going to talk a lot about React Navigation and give you a quick introduction to how it works. And once we see how it works and how easy it is to use, we'll take a look at what it's like to use it on the web. OK, so let's start by building an application with React Navigation. And we're going to start with a few screen components. Now, these are full components that kind of cover the entire screen. Here they have a couple of links that aren't working yet, but we're going to wire this up. Now, before we have navigation in our app, we basically are just hard-coding the screen to be the whole application. So this is clearly not what we want. Now, let's go ahead and upgrade this to use React Navigation's simplest navigator, which is the switch navigator. Let's take a look at how it's used. You basically just call it like a higher-order component, and you pass it some route configurations. So here we're naming each of our routes, one route for the login, one route for the home, and they're pointing to the screen components. They can also point to route configurations, but the easiest thing to do is point directly to the screen components. And also, if we want to be a little bit more concise, we can go ahead and abbreviate these to make it so the route names are the same as the screen component names. And to be extra explicit, we should be providing the initial route name to identify which key in our object is going to be the first thing that we present. In this case, it's the login. So to actually make this work, we can call props.navigation.navigate login. So the navigation function, or the navigation prop, is passed into every React Navigation view, React Navigation screen here. So let's take a look at what it's like when we modify that state. I'm going to click to home, and it switches to our home screen. OK, that part is pretty straightforward. Let's skip ahead to Stack Navigator, which is actually used in exactly the same way when you're getting started. It's, again, just create Stack Navigator instead of create Switch Navigator, another higher-order component here. And here I'm going to click, and we're going to navigate to a screen inside of the stack. And it does that nice push animation. It also gives us the header. Now, it's pretty important to be able to pass params to different screens, because in our example here, there's one lesson screen, but it can handle multiple lessons, lesson A, B, or C. So here, we can pass a second argument to navigate of options object. And then next, on our screen, we need to be able to consume what our ID is. So inside of our lesson screen, we can see what the param is by calling navigation.getParam. Great. Let's talk about navigation options, because that's how we are configuring our Stack Navigator's header. So the welcome text comes from navigation options. And sometimes your navigation options actually need to depend on your navigation prop. For example, if you need access to params, like we do here. You see how the title here is lesson A. This is how we can do that. We can specify a slightly more dynamic navigation options that has access to the navigation prop. And then we can get the param. And we can also call navigate or whatever else inside of there. OK, let's talk about some extra behaviors that the Stack Navigator has that's sort of different from the Switch Navigator we were looking at earlier. If we call navigation.navigate, it will take us to a screen with that name and that ID. So let's take a look at what happens when we tap into lesson A. And then we're going to go ahead and tap into lesson B. Now, it did take us to lesson B, but it didn't push again. It used the existing lesson item in our stack. And this is new behavior in React Navigation v2. We found that it's a little bit more logical as applications get larger. So to be extra explicit, and if you really want to push a new thing onto the stack, you can call .push. So here I'm going to call push A. Here we can push B. And here we can push A again. So this is potentially the behavior that you'll want for your application. But for this application, it's kind of an educational app, and I want there to be a logical flow between the screens. So let's make it so that, and as you can see, we're pushing multiple screens here. We're always going to be pushing, even if we're pushing the same screen again twice. So that might not be what we want. In this case, let's pass a key to the navigate action. And this is saying that I always want to go to the route name of lesson with the key lesson A. If that key doesn't already exist, we're going to go ahead and create it. Oops, let's go ahead and show you that. Now if I tap lesson B, it takes me to B because I'm already here. If I tap go to C, it takes me forward. If I tap lesson B, it takes me back because that's the route with the ID of lesson B. Okay, so now we've got some idea of what's going on when we call push and we call navigate. But let's take a look at what is actually happening because it works a lot like Redux. These are really just navigation actions. So this is a navigation action creator for the navigate action, something similar we were just looking at. And it expands out into an action like this, just a normal Redux style action. And we call navigation.dispatch and pass the action into it. And of course, this looks very similar to what we were doing earlier with navigation.navigate because it's really doing the same thing. All this is doing is it's creating a navigation action and it's passing it into navigation.dispatch. Okay, so now let's talk about how we can take one navigator and put it inside of another. Let's try importing both the stack navigator and the switch navigator from React Navigation. And here we can compose them pretty directly like this. Here we're putting the switch navigator on the outside, which is why we're starting on the login screen. And then inside of it, once we switch to the main route, we can access home and lesson inside of the stack. Now, this button actually still calls navigate to the home route. So React Navigation is smart enough to know that when you tap on to home, it'll actually take you to the home route right here. And if you tapped on lesson, it would take you to the stack, and then it would go ahead and push a lesson, or navigate to a lesson inside of the stack. Okay, now let's take a look at what that looks like. You know, we can switch states to go into our main navigator, and then we can do some navigation inside of there. All right, now let's go, we're racing ahead, going straight to the tab navigator, and here we're going to compose it right away. We're creating a bottom tab navigator, which gives us this UI down here. And we're putting a stack navigator inside of each tab. So there's a stack for overview, a stack for tutorial. Now, each stack maintains its own state. So here I've navigated to lesson A inside of the middle tab. If I tap back here and tap back, I'm still navigated to lesson A. Let's take a quick other visualization at that. The state of each tab gets retained. The state of each navigator is retained. Okay, let's take a quick look at what this is like to work with. Where's all my stuff? Okay. So here we're creating a stack navigator for the home tab, stack navigator for the overview tab, and we're creating a bottom tab navigator, and we're putting in each of our 3 tab navigators as the routes. This is used to configure the icons, as you might expect, and we're just exporting this app. So this is pretty straightforward. It's a working React Native app. Now, if I take a quick look at what's going on in this file, all of this stuff is pretty high level. So I don't see any reason why we shouldn't be able to run this on the web. And if we use React Native Web and go through a lot of tooling pains, it actually kind of works out of the box. So here, let's go ahead and do some navigation inside of here. So the navigation UI works in here, but it also works on the browser. Oops, not this time. Still doing a little polishing. Cool. So let's go ahead and take this to the next level. Let's go ahead and create a new app, which is a switch navigator. We're going to level up and make a deeper stack of navigators here. So we'll say that there's a login route and a login screen that we saw earlier, and there's also the main route, which is this navigator that we were just using as the app itself. Okay. So here we should start on login, and we can navigate. And you'll notice the URL is roughly reflecting where we go. Cool. Of course, it's working on React Native as well. It works on Android too, I promise. I just didn't want to slow my computer to a crawl. All right. So let's jump back into our slides. You'll notice that the URL handling didn't quite behave like it normally would on a mobile app. In fact, you know, here's what's fun too, is it looks really nice inside of Safari, right? It looks like almost like a real iOS app. And I don't even have it configured as a PWA or anything yet. So here we've got our pretty normal behavior. But you'll notice that if you change tabs, the state of that other tab is preserved. But if this were a normal traditional web app, you would think that when you tap back on this tab, it would take you to the first screen inside of that tab. So clearly, we're persisting the navigation state of that tab. Now, to understand a little bit more about why this is behaving differently, let's talk about how URLs are handled on mobile apps. So as you might know, you can specify a custom URI scheme that you can register on your mobile device, and you can click to, and it'll open your app. And you can specify a path on here, and here we also have a query to say that we are navigating to the Home tab, and within the Home tab, we're going to navigate to a lesson, and with this particular ID. Now, on a fresh start of the application, this behaves a lot like the web. So here we have a blank navigation state. We're starting off on the Home tab, and we haven't navigated inside of any of our tabs, but we want to handle this URL, where we're switching to the Home tab, and we're opening a lesson inside of it. So this is what would happen. Pretty straightforward. But if the application is already running, and we're asked to handle a URL, we need to change the navigation state. So here, let's open up the Overview tab. Let's pretend that the user is tapping on this link, switching to the Overview tab, and opening a lesson. Now, it works just fine, and the interesting thing here is that the Home tab retains its state. So this is not behavior that we usually see on the web. So this is one of my big theories, is that URLs change the state, they don't define it. I think this is really critical to understand. So I'm going to repeat myself. I really think URLs are actions, because actions are what we have to change state in our ecosystem. And I'm going to repeat this because I really think it's important. URLs are navigation actions and not navigation state. I really think this is critical to understand and internalize if you're going to succeed with having a shared code base between web and mobile. Let's talk about the routers now, because the routers actually define all of the navigation behavior of our navigator. So because we've got actions, we've got navigation state, shouldn't we have reducers? Hell yes, we should. So routers have navigation state reducers, and this is what they look like. It's called router.getStateForAction. You pass it the navigation action that's happening, you pass it the last navigation state, and it returns the new navigation state. It's pretty straightforward. But what's a little bit new is that routers also define URL behavior. This is what's fascinating to me, is that we can use a router to convert a URL into an action that we're going to pass into our reducer. Next, we can take a look at our existing navigation state. The router will define a way to convert the navigation state into the current URL that we should put up in the URL bar so that we can show the user where they are. So routers have basically these three functionalities: the reducer of the navigation state, the ability to convert a URL to an action, and the ability to convert the current navigation state to a URL so that you can update the navigation bar. Okay, so now that we understand what routers are, at least a little bit, let's talk quickly about custom navigators. So here, we're creating a switch navigator, just a normal old thing. And let's say instead of main, we want to actually have something else. We want to do something custom. Now, you could have a very bare bones implementation like this, where you have access to props.navigation.state. And it's called custom navigator, but it actually doesn't have navigation behavior yet. This still behaves just like a normal screen component, like login or home. We haven't done anything different here. So in order to expose navigation behavior to our parent, to whoever is using custom navigator, we need to specify a static router on it. So this defines the navigation behavior of our navigator. And a minimal router might look like this. You define getStateForAction. You'd handle an action and a last state. If your action type matches something, then you might do some, return some custom navigation state. Otherwise, you're just going to return the previous state or an initial state. Now, most of the time when you're working with custom navigators, you're going to be extending another navigator that already has some existing behavior. Now, here, the main navigator is what we're rendering, and we're just going to pass it the normal navigation prop that we get. And here, we're going to expose the main navigators.router. So what we see here is actually pretty identical. So custom navigator now is going to have identical behavior to main navigator. But we can go ahead and do other things here if we want. Same when you're extending routers. The most common thing you're going to do is extend the router of another navigator or find a router from somewhere else and extend that. Then you can augment it with custom navigation behavior. So here we're overriding getStateForAction. We're detecting the case when our custom navigation action is happening. But otherwise, we're falling back on the behavior of the router.getStateForAction. Okay, so this is sort of how you can override and extend navigators and routers. But how exactly are these navigators controlled? These are actually controlled components. So the main navigator is always being told what to present via the navigation prop. But wait a second, where is the navigation prop coming from? Because there is going to be a top-level navigator, and how does that navigator get access to the navigation prop? That's a good question, right? Well, we have this concept of containers that we can use to provide the navigation prop to the top-level navigator. Now, here's the one that we use with React Native, but we use different containers for web. So here's create navigation container. It ships with React Navigation. And we're just going to use it as a higher order component on our top-level navigator. And it's automatically going to provide the navigation prop, and it's going to use the router that's on my navigator to determine the navigation behavior. Now, on React Native, create navigation container binds your navigator to the Android back button so that we handle back buttons correctly. And it also binds to the linking libraries so that we can open URLs no problem. Okay. Now, I was going to dive into a demo, but I'm running a little bit short on time. So how about I just show you that, this is actually, we're running in the demo right now. This is it. We're running React Navigation right here, which I think is pretty fun. A lot of people at React conferences like to implement their slides with React. Vincent just did it yesterday with his really killer demo. But how many of them do you really see that server render? So with React Navigation, we can pretty trivially server render because using the router, we can determine what the navigation state is going to be before we render any React components at all. Okay, so that's a quick demo of what it would be like to sort of customize that behavior, right? Oh, actually, we have a custom navigator in this demo. So this is a custom navigator. Now, I've implemented actions for previous slide and next slide. Now, I know you can't see the URL bar very easily from here. Here we're on slide 79, and if I go forward, we're still on slide 79. So that means that this slide has actually handled the navigation action. And basically, its router just matches for the next slide action, returns a new state in response to that. And because the inner router returns a new navigation state, the outer router, who's usually responsible for handling next slide, for example, the outer router just lets the inner router handle it. If the inner router returns the same navigation state, the outer router knows that it's responsible for handling this next slide action. Cool. So that was kind of a lightning introduction to React Navigation and the way that it works internally. If you want to take a look more, we've got our GitHub org here. You can feel free to @ us at React Navigation. We've got an awesome React Navigation website with killer docs from Brent Vatne, and we also have a blog that we update occasionally. Cool. Let's talk a little bit about community navigators, because this is what is so exciting to me, and it's what I really came here to excite you all about, is that we can build a community of navigation components that all play nice together. So let's take a quick look at a demo. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to let's replace our ugly screens with nicer looking screens. So here we're importing home and lesson from test screens. Let's get it from real screens. Yeah, that's better. Okay, there we go. Not looking so bad. Let's take a look at React Native. Oh, we need a refresh. Okay. So let's go ahead and get a better login experience. But I don't really want to write a new login experience myself. I just kind of want to download something off of NPM that has its own navigation behavior. So let's say that we had imported something off of NPM at the top of the file called create login. And here we're going to pass in whatever we need to configure our login navigator. It might be the API key. In this case, it's nothing. But we're going to go ahead and create a login screen. So this is what I call sassy login. So it's gonna let you log into the app, but you're gonna have to put up with some sass. So who dis, right? Yo, I'm new here. Okay, yeah. All right, I see how it is. This isn't a real NPM component, is it? Yeah. Okay, but it does demonstrate that we can have navigation behavior that we just drop into our app that we had installed from elsewhere. Yeah. Oh, are you kidding me? Okay, let's verify it. Okay, yeah, you know what to do. All right, and then we make it into our normal app. Okay. And let's see if it works on the web. OK, there's a slight rendering error at the top there. I don't really know what's going on. OK, looking good. OK, so now that we're looking at our real screens, they're just not very, this isn't very slick. I think we can do better. And by we do better, I really mean I think the community can do better. So there's one community navigator that I think has blown everything else sort of out of the water, and it's from Christian Falch, called Fluid Transitions. And it's a shared element navigation library. Now I'm going to give a quick demo right away, because who has time for slides right now? Let's go ahead and just make it so that this image acts as a shared element transition. Now on real screens, I'm going to go ahead and switch, turn on a back button header, because we're going to switch to a different navigator here. So right here we have a stack navigator for our home tab. Let's go ahead and do create fluid navigator. OK? And fluid navigator doesn't have a header, which is why we're rendering our own back button header right here so that we can jump out of our lesson once we get into it. All right? Now let's go ahead and take a look at lesson cover image. Now this is the same component that we're rendering both on this screen as well as on this screen. And you can see that we had a fade happen just now, and the header is gone because we have switched over to Fluid Navigator. Now, Fluid Transitioner ships with Transition View. And we can basically wrap our component with a transition view to identify that this is the component we want to sort of configure the transition for. And the coolest way that we can configure the transition, let's be honest, is the shared element. So let's go ahead and say that shared is going to be some ID. So it's going to match the ID of the shared elements on one screen to the screen that it's going to. So if we just use lesson.id, and if we only have one shared element per navigator, then we'll be fine. Oh, here, let's do that. OK. I know. OK, let me in. Now let's see how our shared element looks. OK, not bad. Isn't that fun? It's still coming along, but let's give it up for Christian. Like, that's some great work. And it looks like we had the same error here on web. But let's take a quick look at how that is. It seems to have less flashy than it does on React Native. So I think the browser implementation of the image cache is a little bit nicer than React Native's. But that is a quick introduction to some of the amazing things that the React Navigation community has been working on, aside from the sassy login, which was entirely fabricated. Now, if you want to take a look at these slides or take a look at these demos, you can check out this repository at ericvicenti/universe. I really recommend you do so because it's pretty easy to start playing with these things. All right, you can also tweet at me. I'm at ericvicenti. You can follow me. I'm going to be doing more full stack navigation and full stack development at avon.io. I'm going to be starting a live stream. And that's been a quick introduction to React Navigation and some of the amazing things the community has been working on. If you're already a part of our community, either by using the library or by contributing to it, I want to give you a huge, huge thank you. And finally, for the rest of you, welcome to the full stack React Navigation community.